taking wool and just putting a little bit of twist in it, create something that's so strong and can last for hundreds of years. The ancient Greeks, yeah, exactly.
Once for 25 years.
In ancient Greece, they had a lot of stories about spinners, but none were quite as powerful or significant as the Fates. So the Fates were three sisters, and they spun to determine the life and the death of every human. So the sister Clothes, she actually spun the thread, and as she did, Lachesis used her rod to determine the length of each life, and also the quality of life. What tribulations would you have? What joys would you have? And measured the length. And then the final sister, Atropos, was the one who actually used her shears to determine the cause of death and to snip the thread. And once they had decided on the fate, it was not up to negotiation. Even the gods, even Zeus, no one could change the fate of the person. And it was fitting that they were the daughters of Kronos, who is the god of time, and Nyx, the goddess of night. Well, it happened that Apollo and his father Zeus had a little bit of a falling out. You know, these things happen. You kill someone's son with a lightning bolt, and they go and they kill your favorite Cyclops. You know, these things happen. But as a result, Apollo was sent to Earth to live as a mortal for 1 year. So while he was on Earth, and he had none of his powers, but he still was quite gorgeous, but he walked around looking for a place to land. And so finally he came to a castle, and it was ruled by a king who was known for his generosity and his hospitality, Admetus. And so Admetus welcomed him in, he gave him his hospitality, he employed him as a sheep herd, and it was a pretty good gig. You know, he lived in the castle, overlooking the Aegean Sea, life was good. And the time passed, and it was 1 year, and he got his powers back. And he wanted to do something to show just how grateful he was for his time there. And he knew that Admetus was quite smitten with a woman named Alcestis, whose father was having none of it, and said, if anyone is going to court my daughter, they need to arrive in a chariot that is pulled by a lion and by a boar. And up until this point, that was something that couldn't be accomplished, but for Apollo, it was, yeah, right? Apollo was no big deal. He created the chariot and got the animals, and Admetus went, and the father was quite impressed. And the two courted and eventually decided to marry. Now, it was a joyful day, but they did commit one big faux pas. You see, when you got married, you really needed to offer something to the god or the goddess of the area, and they did not. And it just so happened that it was Artemis, the twin of Apollo. And so she's thinking, this is my brother's human bestie who is completely slighted me. And so she left them a little token of her feelings, which was in their wedding bed. It was some venomous vipers. And Admetus was quite eager to consummate, so he just hopped right in the bed that night, and he was bitten. So Apollo hears the shriek from Alcestis, and he comes rushing down, and he sees Admetus there, and he knows that he's fated to die. He knows this is going to happen. And he's desperate to find a way to somehow overcome this. And he makes a choice that only a desperate man or God would do. I'll just go reason with the fates, that this is something that should not happen. So he goes and he seeks them out, the sisters. And he sees them. And now, he's not the god of the sun, but he can control the rays. And the man knows how to make an entrance. So he comes striding in with his golden hair flowing and the sun shining on him as if he's on fire. And he kind of saunters suggestively, and he stops and he puts his foot up, brings out his lyre, and he begins to play. Are just smitten, especially Atropos, I think it's the first time that Atropos has been stopped in her tracks, and it's possible that her wizened face, the jaw dropped just a little bit as she looked at him. And he saw the sisters of fate, and he greeted them, "Hello, Clovis." And she smiled. "Hello, Lachesis." She said, "Greetings, Apollo." And he turns to Atropos, who had just at that moment had her shears with the thread of Admetus' life. And he says, "Oh, my lovely Atropos." And she stops a minute and she stands up and she says, "Atropos, the unyielding." And he says, "Of course, your determination is one of the most beautiful things about you," Atropos said. "I just wanted to come and see you, Fates, and offer you some of this delicious wine Dionysus made, because you know how much we all appreciate you." And the sisters looked at each other, and they were, of course, skeptical, but Dionysus' wine was quite good. So one glass couldn't hurt, and they each accepted a crystal goblet from the god Apollo, who in turn raised one of his own, and they toasted, and he toasted to Clotho and Lachesis and Atropos, the unyielding. And they drank. And then he sat down, and he continued to play. And as he played, they drank. And he would refill the glass as they did.
Sorry.
And the sisters were relaxed by the music, and they continued to drink. And finally, Apollo said, "You know, you are so lucky to have each other. Not everyone has it as good as you. Take me, for instance, and my sister. You would not believe what she did." And Clovis said, "What do you mean, what she did? She's lovely." And he said, "Oh, yes, you would think so. She's brave, and she's wise, and she's chaste. But you would not believe what she did." And finally, Atropos' interest is perked, and she said, "Well, what did she do?" And as he refilled their glasses, he said, "You know, she tried to kill my very best human friend on the night of his wedding." And they gasped, and he said, "Oh, I know. If only something could be done." And so Atropos is there. She puts down the goblet. She says, "I have my shears out, and I'm not going to put them down, but..." And he said, "Yes, Atropos?" the unyielding, because she was by this time quite drunk. And she says, "If you can find someone to agree to have me snip their yarn, have me snip their life instead, I will spare Admetus." And he says, "Oh, of course, you're unyielding, your will be done." And he left and he went back down to earth. Now at this point, Admetus was still in the bed, and Alcestis was still by his side. And in that time where Admetus was still incapacitated, Apollo was busy. But finally, Admetus opened his eyes, and he saw Apollo. And he said, "Apollo." And Apollo grabbed his hand. And then Admetus looked around and he said, "But where's Alcestis?" And Apollo said, "Oh, my dear Admetus, that is a story for another time."